All right, so I am here with Adam Bear, my good friend. We are doing a conversation with people who hate me for my policy class. Very nice name. But again, this is a conversation about a point we have disagreements on. Maybe not as fully as some disagreements, but we just have different viewpoints on things, and we're going to discuss our points. And at the end, kind of come together, talk about what we agreed upon, disagreed upon, and anything we might have learned. Hopefully, keep it civil. No, no below the belt. Don't insult my mama. And other than that, the topic is gonna be U.S. interventionism, and I guess this is kind of broad, so we can go. It's fine to go kind of any way you want. If it could be military, sanctions, interfering in other countries' politics. My position is going to be that I feel America does have a right and a duty to interfere in the world stage at times. And I know your position, at least you explain it, is that you kind of think we should be butting out, maybe not about everything, but that we are far too involved on the world stage, being, far too engaged. Is that correct?
Yes, to an extent. But you can go
Yeah.
into the nitty gritty a little bit later, but that's
Yeah.
basically my position.
Yeah, we don't have to go overboard crazy with disagreeing. Again, there can be nuances and things we do agree on, but that'll be our positions for now. So I will start to kind of do my 20 minutes on how I feel. Let me start my timer up here. It doesn't have to be exact. I just wanted, because I have a tendency to ramble, so I want to make sure that this will keep me somewhat structured. So anyway, I guess my history with U.S. interventionism, the first time I really remember it starting as a big problem, or as people saw it as a big problem, was the first Iraq War. America has been involved on the world stage across all kinds of global conflicts, both militarily and, with issues with other people's governments. Way back since we helped win the War of 1812. Issues with, the English in Canada, and helping France, as well as the Spanish-American War, and then all the way up to I guess besides the current wars, Vietnam was the one that caught the most media attention of us being involved in other people's affairs when we shouldn't have been. And even though there's been a whole host of ones, I think that one is a big one I'll touch on a lot, only because my wife is Vietnamese, and since she's Southern Vietnamese, and that's still a very polarizing topic. I think that's a good place to start for me, and then I'll kind of branch off and hopefully not ramble too much. But the reason why, in short, before I start going off in the weeds, is with American intervention, how we get involved in other people's affairs across the world, it gets pretty much summarized as blowing everything up and destabilizing everything. One of the reasons why I picked Vietnam is, again, because my wife's family is from Vietnam, and they saw firsthand what had happened when America got involved in their conflict. And back in Vietnam, things were really rough, and the North was incredibly brutal towards the South. And I'm not saying that the South were angels. There was a lot of corruption there too, and the Win, that's the name of the president at the time, Nguyen, was kind of a brutal dictator at times. But he was also trying to keep a country together that had been fighting for several decades up to that point, initially with the French. America had stayed out of that whole conflict. We didn't really want to be much involved with their politics. But ever since World War II, when we had made those declarations that we weren't going to sit idly by and watch people get slaughtered anymore, a lot of brutality had happened in Vietnam, especially at the hands of the North. And my wife will be the first to tell you that it wasn't necessarily America's war. We didn't really have to be there. And when we bombed places, we did kill civilians. That's always been an issue with war, and I don't want to brush it off as oh, that's regrettable, because I hate that line. It's easy to say that until it's your family, but Jamie's father and mother had always talked about a lot of the propaganda that had been shown of Americans doing atrocious things in the South, in the North, bombing villages. We'll always be the first to tell you that a lot of the things that Americans didn't know was a lot of those villages did house tons of guerrillas, and they launched tons of campaigns from those villages down to the south, and a lot of civilians were killed from those launching points. It was a civil war, but it wasn't. It wasn't just a civil war against the North Army versus the South Army. The North was attacking a lot of civilian populations, and at the Tet Offensive, which was probably the turning point where a lot of Americans started getting turned off from the war because of just how much devastation was happening, was when the North started launching a lot of insurgencies into southern cities and killing civilian populations. And again, I'm not saying that we should have necessarily conducted the war in the way we did, but I think this was, besides just a containment of communism, as they like to call it, was really a response to the absolute brutality that was happening over there, and really trying to keep a regime from popping up like which had happened in Korea. Korea being another example. I know I'm kind of going backwards at this point, but we've seen what has been happening in North Korea. And, for the last 60 years, 70 years at this point, the human rights atrocities, the prison camps where people are raped, tortured, beaten, and we put all kinds of sanctions, but it's not stopping the atrocities. And, I think for America and other countries, they like to sit back and think that their sanctions are pressuring these people, but, as far as we're aware, all the people on top are not being affected by these sanctions. It's the people on the bottom. Those are the people who really seem to suffer when the leadership decides that they're going to take even more of the resources. And I think at this point, again, it's complicated. Like, what do we really do? I don't know if sending in necessarily the military would be a great idea. I know that's how Trump originally talked about it, and I'm not really keen on nuclear devastation, as well as all the complications that are with China that would happen there. But I really think that trying to build some kind of coalition with China, something that would happen where we could really make it a threat, that if we were to decide that these brutalities and atrocities that are almost on par with the Holocaust from the people who have survived these camps and escaped North Korea, if we could remove that safety blanket, that China would stop us if we were to try to get more heavy-handed involved in stopping this regime. I think that would be the way I would go about it. I mean, I'm saying that as it's simple, but it's not necessarily. And finally, it kind of all circles back to World War II. After World War II, during World War II and the First World War, America had a long policy of not intervening. And we knew about the Holocaust. We had a bunch of Jewish survivors who had fled into Ellis Island, who were turned back. I believe it was New York, who were turned back at right around the beginning. I don't have the exact date. We said we weren't going to do a whole lot of research before this, just kind of get our points across. But there were Jewish survivors who had come to America to explain what was happening over in Nazi Germany, and our whole position was like, hey, it's not our problem. We don't really have to deal with it. And it really let the German army and the concentration camps and the whole Nazi war machine get a whole lot of steam, because an ill-prepared Europe, when Germany kind of started making his deal, Hitler started making his deals to not go after certain countries. He was basically allowed to just kind of freewheel and start rolling over one country after another. And our sitting back and just not wanting to be involved, even when Britain started coming under attack, I think that was a big mistake on our part. I think if we had decided that it would have been for the greater good to actually move forward, and we knew we couldn't really have diplomacy with Hitler because he was breaking his promises left and right and constantly invading everybody. I think at that point we should have stopped it. I don't know how many more lives could have been saved if America had decided to not be so passive and intervene. And I think we made that resolution after Nuremberg trials, when we started the Geneva Conventions. Wait, Adam, was the Geneva Convention World War I or II? I'm thinking it's one, right?
Geneva? No, Geneva Convention I thought was... No, it was after... I believe it was after World War, because that's when they started saying we're not going to use biological or chemical weapons anymore.
Okay, yeah, I was about to say, yeah, because I was pretty sure the Geneva Convention.
Though.
Yeah, I should have. That's a That's one I should know. It's with
That's fine.
but yeah, I'm pretty sure it was after two. But the Geneva Convention. Or I was gonna say after the Nuremberg trials, we really had a moment where we said, this can't happen again. Genocides can't happen again. The world, and it's not just America. We're talking about American interventionism, but the world basically said, Europe and America had basically said, we can't let this kind of stuff happen again. And as we've seen since then, it's happened multiple times. Rwanda being a big one. Rwanda being a big case where the UN was completely hamstrung in being able to do anything to stop it. There's always bureaucratic rules and red tapes that, they make sense because you don't want a military force jumping into action and, sending in troops and start shooting at everybody because, it's. I'm not saying blunt force is the best option, but especially like with Rwanda, that lasted far too long. I know it wasn't as long as some of the other atrocities like Pol Pot's rule, but we really didn't do anything. We knew it was happening. It was a genocide. It was extremely brutal, and America kind of just sat back and let it happen. And I know a lot of the questions become then, why does it just America? When it comes to interventionism, why doesn't other countries involve? And I think one thing to remember is America's huge. We have a humongous population. We have a very large military, and we spend an ungodly amount of money on our military, which is a problem, in my opinion, especially on where it's spent. But that aside, at least for now, we have the resources to flex our muscle when people start doing things that are atrocious. We have to build coalitions. I don't think America should go in it alone. I think we should, if we're going to go in militarily to stop something like a genocide, we should be calling in other countries and nations to help us, like Germany, France, England. And I think for the most part, many will if the cause behind it is just. I think with the invasion of Afghanistan, which again is controversial and something that's still happening, the Taliban was incredibly brutal, and it always kind of annoyed me when people talk about things like women's rights and egalitarianism, and then you point to something that was happening under the Taliban, and people say, "Oh, well, that's just their culture." And I mean, it gets really muddy because then people start saying, "Oh, that's Muslim culture." That's not what it is, but it's the culture of that region, the leadership that was running it and enforcing a lot of these really crazy rules, were things that were unbelievably barbaric, and things that if they were happening here in America, if people were trying to, well, people are trying to push those kind of religious legislations that strip people of their, equal rights, LGBT especially, and trans rights being a huge one right now. If anyone was, whenever people try to bring up legislations that are even a fraction of what some of these rulers out in like Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is also a big. We see it as one big country, but the provinces all kind of have their own different makeups. But in some of the worst areas, if we even had a fraction of people trying to pass laws like that, I think violence in the streets would be running rampant. If people were trying to say if a woman had sex outside of marriage, she should be beaten to death. I think that would cause violence. And just from my professor, Dr. Twill, I'm not saying all of Afghanistan was like that or anywhere, the whole Middle East. Again, these were sections run by essentially warlords who were passing some pretty crazy laws, and not even always in the name of their religion, but unfortunately there was, theology was a big aspect of, or at least what they pointed to. And I think that us getting involved when we did to break up a lot of terrorist cells wasn't a bad idea. I mean, it didn't make Afghanistan safer in the long run, because I think what ended up happening, from my understanding, is America kind of went buck wild and we started going after Iraq. For whatever nonsense reason we decided to, Bush wanting to impress his dad, and that alienated us with a lot of our allies, especially France. And believe it or not, France actually has a pretty decent military, and their Foreign Legion is from what I've read up on them, incredibly potent fighting force. But Afghanistan was just become a giant mess because we kind of rolled in there and kind of bombed it to hell, and didn't really understand the culture and the people, and that the fact that it's not a unified nation and there was no central leadership like our presidency and Congress and Senate. So we were kind of playing whack-a-mole with warlords. But again, I felt that that was a justified response. We were attacked. Well, he was a Saudi, Osama bin Laden, but we were attacked, and a lot of his backers and a lot of the people that were helping him facilitate and his, housing him, his fighters and his recruiting centers were in Afghanistan. So I felt that was a justified intervention through America and some of our allies. Perhaps the whole reason why we did it, with the politicians wasn't good, but I think it was necessary. And I think right now what I've been reading a lot about is with China and their oppression of the Uyghur, I believe they're called. Can you help me on that one, Adam? It's
yeah,
Uyghur,
yeah,
right?
it's the Uyghur.
Yeah, the Uyghur population. And, we don't have a lot of information because China is pretty good at keeping a lid on the different things that are happening in their country. But from what we do know, there's a lot of detainment centers. A lot of people are being rounded up, and they're ethnically targeted. And I mean, because of how big some of these detention centers are, and China's propensity to kind of execute people for the smallest offenses, such as like marijuana trafficking. If you traffic in any marijuana into China, they will kill you unless you happen to be well connected. You might get some other kind of punishment, but for by and large, people who do anything that violates what they consider the greater good, they're pretty liberal with their death penalty application. And as far as we know, the Uyghurs are being targeted pretty badly. And we don't know the extent of how bad it is. We have some people who are coming forward to tell us. It becomes very hard to verify. But this is another issue where I fear that there's a large group of people who are being systematically eradicated and ethnically cleansed. There's an ethnic cleansing that could potentially be going on. That we are taking the position where we don't really want to make China mad because they're a huge economic power. They hold most of our debt. So, intervening too harshly in what they're doing could have massive economic repercussions. But I also start thinking back to if we had had the same relationship with Hitler, would that have justified us sitting out or not even asking about what was going on in the Holocaust? And to me, that would be unacceptable. There has to be some other way. But again, people aren't itching for another war in this country. A real war. I mean, war with China would be, if it went to a ground war, it would be catastrophic. People in this country, we've always had war hawks, but again, I think America does need to find a way to intervene, and I think sometimes you have to flex that military muscle and say, like, if you're going to systematically eradicate people, we're going to fight back. Wagging our finger, taxing some of their goods, which they will just retaliate, against. Trying to go to economic war with China, I don't think would really accomplish much, at least not quickly. And when people are being potentially killed in the thousands, possibly tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, we really can't play games. I think America is in the best position, economically and militarily, to tell people to knock it off. I know a lot of the counter argument is that we have our own issues and own problems, and that's true. But if we still have the option to stop another country from engaging in behaviors that were, that we had made a resolution that we would never allow, what does that mean about our strength? What does it really mean about our conviction? And what does it really mean about our morals? If we're unwilling to save people because it might hurt our business interests, if we're not willing to look for other ways to recover economically and to just sit back quietly and let a whole group of people die. And again, with those examples, just to wrap it up because I got 2 minutes, with those examples, that becomes my whole point on why I believe America does have a duty at times to respond. We have a military force that can respond, can mobilize across the world within 24 hours. People know, I mean, almost every country knows that if they were to go to war with us, no matter how many casualties we suffered, they would lose. As long as we were to go to real war and not just sit back and drone strike them, but if we were to really mobilize our military, it would be catastrophic. Again, I realize that that's also me saying it's okay for our young men and women to go out and die, which is not what I would take lightly. Again, I think going to war, if we were to use our military intervention, it would have to be very well thought out, and it would have to be a coalition. But again, in this world, we've been seeing time and time again large groups of people being murdered, and a lot of other countries that don't have our resources, our manpower, our technology, they just can't do it. They can't mobilize on their own, and we do have that capacity. I think the only other real country that can do that potentially is, well, China and Russia, and we're not really great friends with either of them, and I don't think Russia would help us much to go against China in this Uyghur issue. But that's pretty much my point on American interventionism, why I think it is our duty and responsibility. So hopefully that wasn't too rambly, Adam.
No, it was good.
Alrighty. So now it is your turn. If I could inconvenience you so much.
Yeah. Let me just get a if I can stay on here. And started.
All right, hold on. Let me switch my G-Sync to open mic so that it captures your voice, because that would be depressing if it did not.
Yeah. Now when I can start.
All right. You should be good to go.
Okay. So again, my name is Adam Baer. My position is that U.S. Interventionism, specifically military, is not generally a good thing. I think anyone, if you talk to any normal person, any normal, person on the street, you say, is genocide bad? And to the one, most people would say, yes, genocide is bad. Unfortunately, that's not generally how the U.S. has done military intervention. It's not. The bulk of the work is specifically not about stopping. It's not about stopping genocide. It's not about protecting the innocent. It's more about protecting U.S. interests abroad. I'll give you a quick story here. I was looking up this when I wanted to see a better idea. So, interestingly, the best example of U.S. military interventionism being just quite silly is best example in Haiti. In 1991, a CIA-backed military coup ousted President Jean Bertrand Aristide. I think I'm saying that right. If I'm screwed that up, I'm sorry. Then, very interestingly, they need to oust him again in 1994 to 1996. They have to. No, actually, they don't depose him. They depose the military rulers of Haiti and then restore President Jean Bertrand Aristide to office. And that lasts for a while until 2004, where the CIA-backed forces have to overthrow Jean Bertrand Aristide in Haiti again. It's a comedy of errors in the military. Yes, we have the largest military budget on Earth, $748 billion. The next closest is the People's Republic of China at $148 billion, I think. So even with all that money, and even in the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, we still can't get it right. And to argue that yes, we should stop genocide is, I think, a noble request, and that's fine. But under that guise, the United States has been able to take that position of, we are the police of the world, you will do what we say, and if you step out of line, you're going to all of a sudden, now you're the bad guys. That has happened pretty consistently with our problem, with our system. We were friends with Noriega. We were friends with Noriega in Panama until he started not doing what we wanted him to, and then boom, then U.S. interventionism. We went down. We go down there. Sorry, I think is Noriega Panama. Did I get there? Either way, I mean, I get that better. A better example of that would be.
Yeah, yeah,
troops in
that
North.
was Panama. You
It's
kind of cut
Panama.
out in the yeah. You kind of cut out in the. You started another point. You kind of cut out.
So we were friends with Panama until they decided to not do what we wanted them to do, and we had to send in troops to overthrow their government. Because and it wasn't because the Panamanians were being annihilated by their people. It wasn't. This was not a an attack on an innocent population. This was the United States trying to take care of its own, economic interests around the world. Um, Most importantly, it with that position of us being the police of the world at this point, because we have the biggest budget, we have the biggest military, bigger army diplomacy is all well and good as long as you have the bigger army. I mean, that's how kings and queens of England, royalty in Europe dealt with problems. That's how many cultures have dealt with problems for a long time. It's bigger army diplomacy. I have a bigger army, therefore you're going to do what we want. And when you get into that position where you do have the biggest army, that invites people um, to really kind of to rise against you, because if you're the biggest dog in the yard, eventually there's going to be another dog that's going to want to challenge you. It's pretty standard, and that's why we have so much. So we have so many other cultures, so many other countries that are testing us. We have the United States running drills in Iranian near the Iranian waters, and those drills create tension, and tension creates violence eventually. It's not it's not a matter of an if, it's a matter of a when. So just going around and flexing our muscle for, again, not necessarily to stop genocides, but just to be the biggest kid on the block, to show that we have the force to annihilate your country if we wanted to, isn't exactly a system of government that I think that the United States should be doing. I think that our money and our lives could be better spent doing better things, being trying to actually help people, actually give people the help that they're asking for. Another big problem with U.S. interventionism is that it creates subcastes in the United States at large. And the best example of that is American Samoa. It's a country that we effectively took over. Um, they are sort of U.S. citizens, but not really U.S. citizens. They're under our protection. They're under our they're under our uh, flag, as it were, but they don't get any representation in the United States government. They are taxed without representation, which is, last time I checked, that's why we started this country. Same with Puerto Rico. They have no say in how they have a governor. But that's it. The governor doesn't have a say in how the U.S. treats it. The governor doesn't have a say in how in the government at large. It creates these subcastes of Americans that don't have equal rights. They don't have the same rights that as citizens like myself or Etienne do. Um, and that is due to the U.S. interventionism. That is them. That is them. We can't rise up against the U.S. military. What are we going to do? Let's try to become a state. Well, they're not going to let them do that either, because Congress won't allow it. It really is this unhealthy relationship with the various territories that the United States has under its guise. Um, you could all the people say about we should have intervened in this, we should have intervened in that. All hindsight is 2020. If all you're going to do is go off of the information that we have now and think how should have we acted, you're obviously going to make the right choice. Everybody's going to say yes, we should have stopped. It was in humanity's best interests to stop the Rwandan genocide. Yes, we knew it was going on, but what do we do? How do we do this? I mean, these are the people committing the genocides were Rwandans as well. How do you go about doing that? And with perfect hindsight, yes, you can obviously form a plan on how you should have gone and done that. But in the moment, you never know how you're going to act. And using that kind of language and that kind of an argument lends credence to, well, we got to make sure that we stop this before it gets out of control. Let's intervene now before things get nasty. So, because you don't want another Rwanda, do you? And that ends up being a very compelling argument for anybody who hears it. Yeah, we should stop that. We should go in. We don't want another Rwanda. Let's go into the Middle East. Let's overthrow overthrow some dictators. Let's see what happens. Well, if we couldn't get it right with Haiti, I sincerely doubt we can get it right on the other side of the planet. I wish I had a little bit more faith in the U.S. military, but the U.S. military is a broadsword. They're not a scalpel. They go in, they have very specific skills to do things, and nation building just isn't one of them. They can go in, they can eliminate a target, they can take out people. That's all well and good, but any nature abhors a vacuum, and in politics is no exception. Um, you never know who's the next person that's going to take that person's place. You don't know who's going to be the next dictator, and unfortunately, there's a very interesting concept called the dictator's dilemma, which I'll try to talk about very briefly. So let's say you overthrow a dictator. Now you're the dictator. What do you do? Do you increase rights? Well, that's how the guy got thrown. That's how your previous person got thrown out. So you kind of need to keep being a dictator in order to rule a country that's been ruled by dictators. Otherwise, you get overthrown. It's a very interesting moral problem that when we go in and say, okay, you're a democracy now, what does that even look like? I mean, if we spent a tenth of our military budget on actually creating infrastructure for the countries that we have screwed up so much, I think that would be I think that Haiti would look a lot different, other than having to have multiple regime changes that we had to do with the same guy over and over and over again. So anybody can say that, yes, we want to protect people's rights, yes, we want to protect the world, but what does that do to us? What happens when we have an enemy of ours? What happens when we have somebody who is an enemy of ours and says, hey, look, these people are slaughtering us, these people are ethnically cleansing? What position does that put us in? If what happens if one of our allies is doing the ethnic cleansing? How do we deal with that in U.S. military interventionism? Where do we go? What is our way out of the moral quandary? Do we help? Do we assist do we assist in this military action because they asked us for our help? Do we not? Do we help out our enemy because our ally is doing the monstrous act? It puts us in a position where there's no right way out. It's almost like the movie. I hate to say it, the movie War Games is the only way to win is to not play. Necessarily, and I'm not here to say that we should never help out people when they ask for help. There are always going to be exceptions. There are always going to be situations where the world unites against somebody who's doing terrible things, and in a broad-based coalition. Believe me, I don't know what that looks like, but a broad-based coalition of people willing to stop, monstrous acts, I think can be powerful, and I think it can be a force for good. It's really my biggest issue is what happens on the back end. What happens when things change? You could talk about overthrowing Hitler, and yes, that obviously was a good idea. Stopping the Nazi war machine was clearly in humanity's best interest. But even then, you can see how things went so poorly so quickly. We had East and West Germany. We had people trying to escape from one of our allies committing war crimes. What do? Well, we had to have a Cold War because we couldn't actively go against Russia. And that's, that it wasn't exactly good for the mental health for the planet. Everybody was constantly worried about nuclear war between us and one of our allies. And then, even when the Berlin Wall finally did fall, the first thing that people did was organized crime moved into West Berlin in a move that can only be described as a sprint. They moved in and then started buying up properties all over the place. They bought literally anything they could get their hands on so they could funnel money, because the vacuum that the U.S.-led military intervention created. It created a vacuum of complete and of competent people who actually knew how to run a country, because it was run by the military, which doesn't know how to run countries clearly. So even when we pull out, even when we leave, that vacuum has immense cost. that I think that people don't really understand. We didn't, we're still in Afghanistan. We're still in Iraq. We still don't know how to leave. It's not like, well, okay, we'll put you in charge of somebody else and everything will be fine. That doesn't necessarily bode well for us. That's how we got Osama bin Laden. He was our ally when we were, during the Reagan years. He was an ally of ours that we trained and then abandoned, and then we created the monster that came back to haunt us. This is another excellent example of U.S. military intervention going horribly wrong. We created basically a school of assassins in South America to help overthrow governments. It was led by the CIA. It was to create homegrown cells, as it were, that would be used to destabilize governments that the U.S. found to be dangerous. What ended up happening is they turned into a capture, torture squad that basically wreaked havoc through all of the banana republics, all of the banana producing environments. Because America really likes bananas, so we needed to create assassins to ensure that the governments that created our bananas would provide us with bananas on the regular. Our need for bananas outweighed human lives and government stability, and the South American cultures who have had to deal with the School of the Americas are still affected to this day. And that was 20, 30 years ago when it finally closed down, I believe. So the other big point is that we can't even keep this country together. We are effectively, we have 5% of the population of the planet, and we have 25% of the prison population of the planet. We don't even know how to deal with our own house. We don't know how to properly deal with our own culture. There are still children in cages from people who are trying to come into this country. They're still there. We don't even have an understanding on how to deal with our own people. Clearly, with the various issues, police violence, the militarization of the police force, the unequal representation in government via the Senate, which I'll get into that later. We can't even figure out our own problems. We can't solve our own issues. So for us to go around the world and tell everybody that, no, you should do it our way because we know better, falls on hollow ears. We can't we can't feed everybody properly. We can't clothe everybody. We can't house everybody properly. We have, we have people, living, on the fringes of society. We have soldiers that are coming home that we can't take care of, and to ask them to then go out and protect America's interests at the same time when they come home, their families aren't even covered under their military their health care. I believe I know somebody in the military, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on that one, but families are not generally covered under health plans. So
I don't know. I've never heard of that because all of my Air Force friends, their families are covered. Their immediate families,
okay.
Spouses and children.
Maybe. Okay, well then that's good. That's at least I'll give them that then. But the homeless vets are a trope because it's accurate. People come home from wars. The United States doesn't know how to deal with them. The VA, it's the largest healthcare system in the country, and that can't take care of its people. So the human cost and the moral cost, I believe that is too high for Americans to really stomach. So I guess I'll wrap this up. So it boils down to, yes, we should stop evil where we can, but saying that evil happened in the past to justify any and all military intervention in the future is dangerous. It destabilizes the world. It makes us the villain. more often than not. It makes us the monster that we hope to stop. We our money can be our money and lives, specifically our lives, can be put to better use elsewhere than trying to do another regime change in Haiti. And I believe that if America keeps going down this path um, of consistent military interventionism, it will lead to our own destruction, like it has for every other country and every other government, empire, whatever you want to call it. Stretching military budgets too thin, overbloated, um, uh, military actions, bases all over the planet that you need to staff, feed, take care of, what have you. The last time something like this happened was the Roman Empire, and this is exactly what happened to them. They went out, they defended their interests in the name of making the world more Roman, and it caused the destruction of their civilization. They were eventually stretched too thin, and then things just started collapsing around them. And eventually, they were no longer the biggest kid on the block. And once that happens, another kid is definitely going to take a swing at you.
Yep.
So that's what there.
All right, cool. So, a lot of good points. We go now to the wrap up, which is another 20 minutes, which I think we can do because we like to hear our own voices. But yeah, I think a lot of those points were good. I guess the part where we definitely agree on, and I was pretty much going to figure this from the start, is that our biggest problem is when America intervenes in what they consider its own interest without thinking about the human cost. Again, my mom, being from South America, is very well aware of what it's like when America kind of jumped in with its corporations and started uncontrolled growth in the urban areas, especially Lima. They started dumping in lots of money into politicians to build what they wanted, where they wanted, how they wanted it. Usually involving lots of cutting corners and deregulations. So they could set up whatever business they wanted in that area to, transfer money, workers, and it led to unbelievable urban sprawl. And then when America was kind of done with what they needed, they pulled out and left financial ruin.
It's similar to what happened in Venezuela.
Yeah. Venezuela's a special little case. That was one.
It is a definite example. United States trying to flex her muscles militarily and business-wise in order to try to get what we wanted, and then when we left, everything fell apart.
Yeah, but I would disagree. Well, looking at Venezuela, because see, Venezuela, me being a huge Bernie supporter, Venezuela, it gets me angry because that's always what people point to say socialism doesn't work.
Oh, that's not my point.
Oh no! I know you are, but I was saying I was looking more into their whole oil crisis and why everything went kaput. And it was foreign interests that were basically saying, Venezuela, if you don't do what we want, we're gonna basically cut you off from the financing you need to keep your country running. But Venezuela did have other options that they could have utilized that they didn't out of stubbornness because their leader believed he could do it all. And I'm not absolving America from their part in it, but that one is a really complicated issue of their leadership also trying to stubbornly go against a lot of recommendations that even their internal people were saying. But again, I think that's also an issue where you and I would agree that America shouldn't have intervened in the way it did and doesn't need. We always hear, like, if Venezuela wants to give us the middle finger, Trump blusters that what if we bomb them? Or, I don't know what he said, but I know he's made veiled threats against them.
Yeah, and that is a big problem.
Yeah, but he's an idiot, so
that's fine.
Yeah.
The problem is that the U.S. military interventionism, it really boils down to do what we want or else.
Yeah.
The or else could be almost anything, and that's where things, in my opinion, get really dangerous.
I will make one correction though. we didn't really train Osama bin Laden, I found out. We funneled money through Pakistan's intelligence service, and they were the ones that were funding the Mujahideen. But even back when that war started with Afghanistan and the Russians,
The Afghanistan.
yeah, Osama bin Laden, even at that time, didn't want our money because he was already well aware that once Russia was pushed out, we were probably going to try to push in, which we did. But I think when you talk about hindsight too, it's interesting because again, backing Saddam Hussein, for example, to fight against the Ayatollah is another thing where I think if we had known how that was going to turn out, we may have sought a different. Maybe not. This is also Reagan we're talking about, and was it? I think
it was Reagan.
Maybe it was, yeah.
But that's my biggest issue. Is that
a lot of those.
If we use this as a tool, and if they have a hammer, everything looks like is the best example of it. And if all you have is U.S. military interventionism, everything looks like a problem you can either shoot, bomb, or threaten in order to make it do what you want. That's where things get really dangerous. That's
true. I think using your military might whenever you can is a humongous problem. But see, this is kind of what I mean, and this is where I think you and I hope we can agree on this. Iraq is a great example of how American military might, got them to comply with what we wanted, without having to. Well, a lot of people did die in the first Iraq war, just not on our side. But Iraq knew that they couldn't stand against us, and that allowed us to do a lot of our UN inspections, keep them compliant. Same with Iran. Iran knew that they would hurt us if we went to war, but we would ultimately crush them. And in the name of self-preservation, they were complying with everything we have wanted to do. And the thing that makes that possible is the fact that you have a military that can stand up to you. I think one of the reasons why someone like China and Russia, one of the reasons they get so bold in a lot of the things that they've been doing that are not just hurting American interests, but hurting a lot of people. I mean, the whole issue that's happening in Ukraine is not good for the Ukrainian people. But I think what keeps a lot of people in check is when you know you can fight back. And I'm always for diplomacy. I'd rather much find a diplomatic route to stopping violence, even if it's in a country that I don't necessarily agree with what they're doing. Again, like Saudi Arabia is a great example. The women's rights there and LGBT rights are atrocious. Would going in there?
That's all well and good.
Yeah.
The argument I would say is does military intervention work?
Well,
it absolutely does. It does work sometimes.
Yeah.
Just because if I the best example is if I get a bad infection on my foot, should I amputate the whole leg? Because a tool is useful doesn't mean that it's the thing that you should actually be using.
Oh, I know, but
immense violence is yes, people are scared of immense violence.
Yeah.
Is that the culture we want to be?
Well, what I was trying to get at was, in order to keep Saddam from developing his chemical weapons that had been used against his population, and to try to keep in check the amount of brutality that his regime was inflicting on people, especially outside of his country, the threat that we would come in and stop him is what was getting a lot of his compliance. Same with Iran was getting other deals too that was keeping them with Obama's deal with Iran. But I think when you're looking at a lot of these cultures and a lot of these regimes and people who are dictators, if you just ask them to do something because it would be in the best interest of people, they're not going to do it. And they won't do it because it's not in their best interest at that moment. If they're doing it in the interest of self-preservation, a lot of these groups will in fact do it. I think that's what was keeping. Now, the problem is, again, with Iraq was a great example of the threat of a military action if they didn't comply was working, and then we invaded them anyway. And that was a humongous policy blunder that killed millions of people. unnecessarily. So that's what I mean by U.S. intervention can work, and having a strong military is important if you want aggressive and non-compliant countries to actually worry about what's going to happen if they don't fall in line. Now we get into the other problem, though, like we were talking with the banana republics,
it's not just does it work? Can it be used to stop bad folks?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is usually not what we.
Well, yeah.
It's saying that yeah, this scalpel is really good. I used it to it was used to take out a bad tumor in my lung, and that's fantastic. And then that doctor goes around stabbing people with that scalpel, looking. It's not exactly the best. It's not a great system if that's if that's if that's the tool. The tool it does work, but the tool is not used for the thing that you want it to be used for consistently. Almost it is, and most of the time it's the CIA, which most of the world fears. Most of the world fears the CIA because if the CIA comes into your
you cut out.
Going to over.
Yeah, you cut out for a second.
Back?
Yeah, you're.
CIA comes to your country, it's probably not in your best interest.
Yeah,
maybe not your government's, maybe not even yours, because you don't know what they're going to do. The CIA has a very specific set of skills and set of actions that they're going to do. They're going to try to destabilize your government. So. And it's not just, oh yeah, we're taking care of people. We're fighting for gay rights. We're fighting for women's rights. We're fighting for women's education. We're really not. We're going into as a military coup to oust a president. That president may be a bad person. Who knows? But in all likelihood, they're going in there to oust that president because they're threatening American interests, not human interests.
Yeah, no, and that's something I would never dispute with you. Because again, I always think back to Iran with the Shah, and when he got deposed, we were like, he goes back in, and he was not a good leader, and he was not who the people wanted. And by ousting him in the way we did, or by ousting the government in the way we did, and installing him back, is what ended up with the Ayatollah, which was much worse. As far as I know, not even the Iranian people are very happy with their leadership. It's just they're aware that outside intervention, it would probably just make things worse, as it always has. But
that's my problem. Is whatever you do, your military, going to leave a vacuum. That vacuum is going to get filled by somebody who is similar to the leader.
But see, I don't think it has to leave a vacuum. And again, I
don't think so either.
I go back to the fact that things are not always going to be great when you leave, but you have to leave. And the way I'm explaining this is South Korea is a great example. South Korea had, when we left, was basically under a dictator. And I don't remember how long that dictator lasted, but it was a while. It was, I think, up into the 80s, possibly 90s. South Korea was not a free country, per se. It was having a lot of problems. It was having a lot of corruption. But what happened is we eliminated the biggest threat at that time, which was the invasion from the north. And once we had that achieved, we left and we said, look, things are not going to be great. Things are not good, but we're going to let you develop along the lines you choose, as long as you don't go back to, as long as they're hopefully not committing genocides. South Korea today, I mean, outside of any country's corruption, is a pretty great place to live. I've been there. I have professors from there. My wife has friends from there. It's not a perfect country, but it developed well. And I think something like Iraq could have the same type of trajectory. We would need to stop intervening and doing acts that make the populace mad. Obviously, that's going to make things worse. When a populace sees you as a liberator and then an oppressor, they're just going to fight back against you, especially if you're a foreigner, because it's much easier to rally against a foreign invader than it is your own people. Afghanistan is a whole mess. we don't
And
understand.
pointing to the South Korea is all pointing to South Korea. The success that led to is all well and good, even though that area of the world is on a razor's edge of apocalyptic Armageddon between this North and South Korea. Even putting that aside, South Korea does have a good
But
record of being a pretty good country to live in. Now let's go look through some of the other countries that we've done intervention in. We'll see if it's a place you want to live. Brazil, Congo, Laos, Ghana, Oman, Chile, Cambodia, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Grenada, Honduras, Libya again, Liberia,
yeah,
Libya again.
those
It's
are
not
other.
we
No,
don't exactly have a great track record of going in correctly, doing the right thing, leaving at the same time.
well,
It's a tool that America just hasn't mastered yet.
a lot of those African countries that are having humongous problems aren't always a result of American interventionism. It's a long, long, long history of colonialism, oppression, and other countries that mess with them. Um,
Absolutely, but
uh,
more colonialism. The answer to you can't kill cancer by giving yourself more cancer.
no, but what I would say was with Somalia, for example, when we went in like '92, it was to we had the whole Black Hawk Down incident. Um, it didn't solve any problem. It didn't solve a majority of the country's problems by failing to even take out one warlord. But again, I go back to Vietnam because again, that's the one my wife is the most familiar with, considering she was from there and grew up under communist Vietnam. American interventionism with Vietnam didn't stop once we pulled out our military. And in fact, if you talk to anyone in her family, they'll always tell you that if America had stayed, because we were bombing the crap out of them day and night for like 90 days or something. I can't remember the one her father was talking about, but they came very close to surrendering the North because we were wreaking such unbelievable havoc. But political pressure out here was causing people to really want to pull back. And again, I say that we stopped our intervention, and everyone here was celebrating that the killing had stopped, and then the killing ramped up real bad out there, like
It's
real
always
bad. Yeah.
that's all. And I totally understand where you're coming. If
But no,
you
no, but
obviously
let me finish this one point though. So what ended up happening is when we pulled out of Vietnam, our military, things in Vietnam were pretty bad for the South for a while. But what happened was America didn't really stop intervening, and we started economically working with them. I'm not sure how this happened. I know it was like Michael Jackson's father ended up buying a crap ton of property out there, but it was what ended up happening was America started intervening in their economy. And by intervening, I mean actually started putting money into their economy and started working with the people of Vietnam. And within, I think now, because my mother just went to Vietnam to visit, to do a tour, and uh, my brother-in-law went back because he hadn't been back since they left when he was like 11. The country is radically different than when they left, and it's still communist, but they're still claiming to be communist, but there's a lot of free market out there. There's a lot more opportunity out there. I mean, there's a lot of corruption out there too, but America did still try to intervene in some ways. You can say it was for their own to bolster their own interests, but he's basically everyone who's been back there who was from there. They don't really remember the Vietnam War because the population out there is so young. So most people who were alive during the Vietnam War are dead, or who remembered it clearly, or they just kind of moved past it because after we left, then China invaded them too. So they've been at war nonstop. But I mean, our intervention didn't stop. It went from military then to economic. So
and that's all well and good. And if all we do is if we if I throw a dart at the wall and then paint a bullseye around it, I can talk about how much I got a bullseye. But by not taking into account all of the catastrophic harm that U.S. military interventionism has done, and only kind of picking at the couple of things that kind of seem to have worked out, I think it downplays the amount of danger that a culture who uses their military with such regularity really does state. And any country who's losing a war, if it's always in your best interest, if you're losing a war, to find somebody with a bigger gun to come and help you. So yes, anybody who's like, oh, I'm losing this war, I better call the United States to have them help me. It's always going to look like we're the knight in shining armor. But it does just because we help out our allies. That's what allies do. So saying that yes, we wanted Americans here because we were your allies that's just how politics generally works.
Yeah, but I again think we both agree that there has to be massive policy changes on how U.S. interventions are done, and when they're sanctioned. But I always get worried that we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, where we just say, you know what, America is going to go into a more isolationist. Because again, I think now, the Uyghur one is the big one. What's going to be done about that? Is it going to be another genocide? And if so, are we just going to let it happen because we don't know what to do, or we're afraid of how other countries are going to see it, or how it's going to impact our economy? Do we just say, well, that sucks for them, And again,
I believe me, I don't have a good answer to.
Yeah, but I think, sadly, to end it on a depressing note, I think that nothing is going to be done for one huge reason: they're Muslim. And right now in this country,
I think that I'd say that's possible. I see it as it is a rival country that we can't just bully.
Yeah,
that's why we're not doing anything.
Yeah.
It's Muslim. It does. I believe in this. In my opinion, religion of the populace being oppressed doesn't matter. It's who's doing the oppressing. Is it somebody that we can run up into their country, drop 27,000 Marines, because it's consistently, we're oddly 27,000 Marines pretty consistently. If you're
they're the first to deploy, but
it's always 27,000. That's 27,000 Marines. Does that scare you?
I think that's because it's the makeup of
brigade or something.
Battalions that get deployed. But
what
I was saying,
hold on, let me finish.
Okay.
If that doesn't scare you, there's really not much America can do, because all you have is that your main weapon is fear. You're trying to scare somebody into doing what you want them to do. And if you can't do that, then the only thing that is left to do is violence, if that's your playbook. So the only move that you have at that point is to be violent. And that is not the best system for the complex global economy that we currently have to function safely.
Yeah. What I was saying about the Muslim population, the Uyghurs, is because of the way our country is so divided over Muslims. I think that does play a part in how much we care as a nation, especially our leadership. Sadly,
I'll give you that. Yeah, I'll say that.
And the reason I would say that too is because with Rwanda, Rwanda was a country we also could have easily bullied into stopping their genocide. I think that when people say, "Oh, it's Africans being Africans" kind of issue, that's what kind of didn't. If it was a bunch of, because again, right now with the whole issue of South Africa, I think like 27 white farmers died or something. It was a small amount. I'm not saying it was an acceptable amount, but there was white farmers who got attacked by South Africans. And unfortunately, I listened to a lot of debates between ethno-nationalists and white supremacists. And you'd be surprised how many of them rally behind this as a call to bring back apartheid. Because a couple of white farmers got murdered. Now suddenly an entire nation's ethnic group needs to be shackled and oppressed. I think that does play a part in it. But again, maybe I'm wrong. I think it is also too, because it's China, and we can't really just bring a whole bunch of warships onto their coast, because
if they don't fear you, then
Yeah.
the only action then you eventually are going to have to back up the threatening language. That's the biggest problem that we fall into, is that you can threaten anybody you want all day long, but if eventually they say, "I'm not threatened by you anymore,"
Yeah.
you have to become violent. You need to use violence in order to show them that, no, you really need to be afraid of me. And that just generally doesn't work all that well.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time, but I think that was a pretty productive conversation.
I think so.
I think we both agree that America has a history of blunders of intervening in other countries' business when they had no need to, and at the other times have use their military appropriately, and we wish we would see more of that and less of Iraq. Um, but but yeah, I think there's some points we might have a little bit of contention on, but at least we're not punching each other in the throat. So I
No, we're allowed to disagree about things and talk
yeah.
about them, and each other's opinions.
All right, man. Well, I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you
And
for doing this. This was really
yeah,
interesting.
yep, you have a great day, man.
All right, you take it easy, buddy.
All right, take care. Bye.